He wasn't supposed to survive the fall, let alone take down a killer with nothing but his teeth and a memory no one believed he still had. But he did. They called him retired, broken, too old to matter. But when the man he loved was framed for murder, he didn't bark. He waited, and when the world turned its back, he hunted the truth down himself. This isn't a story about justice served in court. It's about the kind that bleeds, that hides in shadows, that only a dog. They trained him to obey, but they forgot what happens when loyalty outlives orders. If you made it this far, stay, like, subscribe, and tell me where are you watching from, and what do you think happened that night? Because this isn't just about a man being set free. It's about a dog who never gave up, and what he found when no one else was looking. In the deepest wing of Arkfield Federal Penitentiary, where even the walls seemed to forget the sound of laughter, a man sat motionless beneath a single flickering bulb. Malik Devontae Briggs, prisoner 42,218, had not spoken a word in 3 days. Not to the guards, not to the chaplain, not even to the echoes that sometimes curled through the concrete corridors like whispers of lost men. But that morning something shifted. He stood at the barred window of his cell, his breath fogging the narrow glass, and asked the only favor he'd ever requested in 8 years. "I want to see my dog before I die." Warden Claiborne raised an eyebrow when the request crossed his desk. "A dog?" he muttered, brushing ash from his sleeve. The letter had come from a worn-out public defender, now retired. Attached was a single photograph, old, faded, grainy. In it, Malik crouched in full police uniform, a badge on his chest and a hand resting on the shoulder of a black and tan German shepherd whose name, written on the back, was Kane. Warden Claiborne turned the photo over again and again, like it would reveal something deeper if stared at long enough. "You want a dog brought into a death row unit?" the deputy scoffed. But Claiborne didn't answer. Not yet. Malik knew what the request sounded like: desperate, irrational, even manipulative. But Kane wasn't just a dog. Kane was a memory, a lifeline, the last thread connecting him to the man he used to be, before the murder, before the trial, before the system buried him. Time moved differently in solitary, sometimes slow, sometimes like a whip. Malik would lie in bed tracing the pattern of cracks in the ceiling and remember Kane's bark. That sharp, clipped alert when he sensed danger, and the way his weight felt leaning against Malik's legs during midnight stakeouts. There were nights Malik swore he could still smell him, that mix of fur and metal and sweat from long shifts on the street. Kane had once taken a bullet for him during a drug bust in Oak Hill. Malik took a bullet too, just not the kind that left blood. 2 days after the request, something unexpected happened. A government-marked vehicle pulled through the gates of Arkfield. No sirens, no press, just a lone woman in a dark coat, carrying a leather folder stamped with a seal no one dared question. She spoke quietly with Claiborne behind closed doors, and then, as if it were any other prison formality, the warden returned to Malik's cell and said, "You'll have your visit. 1 hour, $1. The day of the meeting arrived under heavy clouds, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Malik, escorted by 2 guards, was brought to the chapel, the only room in the prison without bars on its windows. He didn't shake, didn't speak, just stood there, fists clenched behind his back. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on a body that had grown lean with time and repetition. Push-ups, pull-ups, prayers whispered into the dark. Then, from the hallway, the soft click of claws on tile. Malik's breath caught. The door opened, and there, led by a handler in full tactical gear, was Kane. Time didn't slow, it stopped. Kane had grayed some, the black in his muzzle now tinged with frost. His eyes, once molten amber, now flickered with a deeper, heavier wisdom. He paused in the doorway, his body tense. Malik's eyes welled, but he held firm. "Kane," he whispered, his voice catching like wind on gravel. "Come here, boy." The dog didn't move. The handler tugged lightly, but Kane resisted, head cocked, ears twitching. Malik stepped forward once. He said, a command from their days in the unit. Kane's body twitched. "Sits." The dog sat, slowly, deliberately. A beat passed, and then recognition. Kane lunged, but not with teeth. He ran full force, knocking into Malik's chest like a wave of memory and fur and breath. Malik dropped to his knees as Kane's paws braced against his shoulders. their foreheads pressing together in something closer to prayer than reunion. The chapel was silent, save for Malik's choked sob and the soft whimpering of a dog who, perhaps, had been waiting all these years for this very moment. The guards didn't move. Neither did the handler. No one spoke, because somehow they understood. This wasn't just a goodbye. This was something unfinished. The hour passed in fragments. Malik spoke in broken whispers, told Kane things no priest had heard, how he didn't kill that cop, how he had evidence, real evidence, but no one had listened, how he still woke up at night expecting the radio crackle, the command to move, Kane at his side. And Kane didn't bark, didn't growl. He listened, tail still, eyes locked. Then, just as the guard stepped forward to announce time was up, Kane stood abruptly, nostrils flattering. He turned toward the side wall, toward a corner of the chapel that held nothing but a dusty cabinet, and growled. A low, guttural sound, not loud, but deep, primal. The guards froze. Malik watched, his mind racing. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. Kane pawed once, twice, then lunged, teeth digging into the paneling beneath the cabinet. Wood splintered, dust flew, something fell out, a thin strip of fabric, blood-stained, faint. Old. The handler stepped forward, confused, then alarmed. "That's not part of the chapel's inventory," he murmured. One of the guards bent down. "This looks like a shirt. Police issued." Malik's pulse hammered. He stared at the cloth, at Kane, at the guards now exchanging glances. No one spoke for a long time. For a moment, the chapel was still charged with that eerie static you only feel right before lightning strikes. Kane stood frozen, eyes locked on the sliver of blood-stained fabric lying at his feet. Malik knelt motionless, his hand resting lightly on Kane's flank, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile thread had just reconnected them. But the stillness didn't. A low growl bubbled up from his chest, not the uncertain kind a dog gives when startled, but deep, guttural, almost accusatory. His body shifted, weight moving back, lips twitching ever so slightly to expose the very edge of his teeth. Malik blinked, taken aback. That sound he hadn't heard since their early days together, when Kane was still fresh from training and suspicious of everything that breathed too fast. But this wasn't that. This was different. This growl had memory behind it, and something else. Doubt. Kane took a slow, deliberate step back, ears flattening, tail stiff and raised. The guard flinched. Even the handler gripped the leash tighter. "Back," he whispered, but Kane ignored him. His stare bore into Malik like he was trying to make sense of something that didn't compute, as if the face he saw didn't match the scent he remembered. Malik raised both hands slowly, his voice dry. "It's me, boy, you know that." The dog didn't move. His growl grew deeper, and for a chilling second, Malik thought Kane might lunge. Not out of loyalty, out of duty, as if Malik wasn't his partner but his target. And in that second, Malik felt it, that unbearable weight of 8 years. The cold concrete, the whispered lies, the dead silence of injustice, folding in on him all at once. Maybe Kane is no longer remembered. Maybe the truth, like everything else in Malik's life, had been buried too deep. His heart sank. Then, without warning, the word came out, not in English, not in pleading, but crisp, commanding. "Sitz." The German syllable cut through the air like a crack of thunder. Kane's ears twitched. His posture faltered. That singular moment held a strange tension, the kind soldiers feel before the enemy breaks cover. The room waited. Kane's body lowered. He sat. Malik's throat tightened. He tried again. Plats. Without hesitation, Kane eased down into a full lay. The growl vanished, his breathing slowed. His ears perked forward again. Alert but calm. The handler loosened his grip on the leash, watching with barely concealed astonishment. Malik's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. His mind had slipped back, not to a memory but to a visceral recollection. A night in South Heights when Kane had obeyed those same commands under fire, dragging Malik behind cover after shots rang out from the rooftop. Back then, their lives had depended on fluency. In commands, in each other. "Such," Malik said next. Kane hesitated only briefly, then rose, took 3 steps forward, and pressed his nose gently against Malik's chest. His tail wagged once, twice, then thumped the floor softly. The warmth of recognition rolled off the dog like waves, and with it came the flood of unspoken forgiveness. He remembered. The handler stepped back now, watching the reunion unfold with disbelief etched across his face. One of the guards, trying to process the tension draining from the air, muttered something under his breath, a single curse wrapped in awe. Malik reached out and stroked Kane's fur, rough and familiar under his palm. The years had changed them both, streaks of gray in Kane's coat, scars across Malik's knuckles, but this connection had survived, as if time had merely paused, waiting for them to find their way back. "You came back to me," Malik whispered, his eyes glinting laugh. Then came a shift, a flicker of motion in Kane's eyes. He turned sharply, gaze snapping toward the small slit vent in the corner of the chapel wall. He let out a low whine, then barked once, loud, focused, urgent. He pulled away from Malik, trotted toward the wall, sniffed rapidly, then looked back at his former handler. Malik stood slowly, following. "Kane," he said carefully, "what is it?" The dog nosed at the air vent again, pawing gently at its edge. It was small, barely enough space for a squirrel to crawl through, but something in it had caught Kane's attention. The guards moved forward, their instincts kicking in, but Malik raised a hand. "Hold on," he said. "Let him work." Kane's behavior changed. His toe stiffened, nose twitching, ears rotating like radar. He barked again, this time shorter, sharper, more precise. Then he sat back and stared directly at Malik. "Alert," Malik said softly, then turned to the handler. "That's a full signal, something's in there." The handler moved toward the vent and crouched. With some effort he unscrewed the loose grill, the ancient screws groaning in protest. Inside was darkness, dust, cobwebs, and something else. He reached in carefully. When his hand emerged, it held a small metal object wrapped in dry cloth. He peeled back the layers and revealed what looked like a body camera. Old, scorched on one side, but intact. The guards froze. "You're what? Can you belong here?" One Malik felt his stomach drop. His voice was low, shaky but focused. "That's standard issue from the 12th precinct year we were deployed." The handler turned it over, his face pale. "This thing doesn't belong here. Body cams are department property. They're never just..." Kane sat perfectly still, tail thumping once every few seconds, eyes flicking between the men like he understood the gravity of what had just been found. One of the guards reached for his radio. "We need to report." "No," Malik said quickly. "Not yet. Not until I know what's on that footage." The handler hesitated. "If this has any kind of evidence..." Malik cut him off. "It does. I know it does. That's the night everything went down, the night the cop died, the night I lost everything." Kane looked up at him, ears perked, as if to say, "You ready for what comes next?" Malik met his eyes. And then the door behind them creaked. The air in the hallway had shifted. The heavy creak of the door behind them seemed to wake something ancient in the prison's bones. The guards turned with practiced speed, but it was only a janitor, old, hunched, pushing a mop bucket and mumbling an apology. Nothing suspicious, nothing they hadn't seen before. And yet, as the moment passed and the door clanged shut behind him, Kane remained still. He didn't bark, but his body tensed as if reading vibrations in the floor, and his nose twitched toward Malik. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he turned and walked a circle around his old partner, sniffing his uniform, his hands, his boots, before pausing near Malik's left shoulder and letting out a sharp breath. Then, with sudden intensity, he leapt forward and started pulling at Malik's jumpsuit with his teeth, not aggressively but with a sense of direction. One of the guards stepped in. "Hey, control your dog," but Malik raised a hand and crouched. "Kane," he said quietly, "what are you trying to show me?" Kane backed off, his eyes fixed not on Malik but on the wall of the corridor adjacent to the chapel. Then, without warning, he bolted. The leash slipped from the handler's hand, and the German shepherd moved like a missile, claws screeching on the concrete as he rounded the corner and charged into the hallway leading to Malik's old solitary cell. The guards gave chase, shouting, but Kane was faster, driven by something primal, something buried. By the time they reached him, he had stopped directly outside Malik's former cell and was standing motionless, eyes locked on a particular section of the wall, one that had been patched unevenly with old cement. A barely noticeable discoloration formed a rough rectangle about shoulder height. Kane growled low, then lunged, his paws hitting the wall with force, claws raking downward, again and again, flinging bits of brittle plaster to the ground. "Get that dog under control," one of the guards snapped, reaching for the leash, but Malik shoved past him. "No," he barked. "Let him finish, he knows what he's doing." Kane's claws struck something harder, a different texture behind the wall. The cement crumbled further, exposing a small cavity maybe the size of a brick. Inside, nestled behind a crumpled piece of insulation, was a smear of something dark red and long-dried into the porous concrete. It had turned almost black with time, but Malik knew what it was before anyone said a word. Blood. The guards froze. One reached for his radio again, but this time he didn't speak into it. The moment had locked them all in a strange truce, the kind that comes when truth breathes through walls and ghosts demand to be heard. The handler moved forward, slipping on gloves before reaching into the cavity with a flashlight. He carefully scraped the inner surface with a swab, then pulled it out for everyone to see. The red smear was unmistakable. "We'll run the test," he said quietly. "If it's what I think it is." "It's not mine," Malik interrupted, his voice low, heavy with something between certainty and dread. "I was never hurt in that cell, not like that." The implication hit them all at once. If the blood wasn't Malik's, then whose was it? The room grew dense with silence. Kane sat now, chest heaving slightly, ears still alert but calm. He had done his job. Hours later, Malik sat across from the prison medic in a cramped exam room near the infirmary. Kane lay beside him, tongue lolling, eyes half closed but still tracking every movement. The swab had already been rushed to the state lab with a priority code, but the medic, an older woman with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much, held a dusty file in her lap, something she had pulled from archive storage at Malik's request. "You said this was sealed," she murmured, flipping through the yellowing pages. "But you knew to ask for it." Malik nodded slowly. "I remembered something. From the night I was processed, there was screaming in the hallway. I wasn't the only one brought in that night. They told me the other guy didn't make it. A John Doe. But the screams..." The medic stared at him, then pulled out a single report, thin, incomplete, handwritten. It was dated the same night Malik was arrested. "Taney admitted unconscious," she read aloud. "Laceration to the abdomen, internal bleeding. Suspect in officer homicide. Died en route." She looked up, no name, no fingerprint scan logged. Malik leaned forward. What if that wasn't the killer? What if that was the cop? The thought hung in the air like smoke. An hour later, the results came back. Type AB negative, extremely rare. Matching the blood type of Officer Daniel Hensley, the murdered cop from Malik's case. The room felt smaller suddenly. One of the guards, who had always treated Malik like a lost cause, sat down, hand running over his buzzed scalp. "But that's impossible," he muttered. "The case file says Hensley died outside the warehouse. You weren't even near the holding wing that night." Malik nodded. "Exactly." Pieces began to shift. Small ones at first: misfiled evidence logs, body cam footage that was marked corrupted, inconsistencies in chain of custody report. Malik stared at the file the medic handed him, the page trembling slightly in his grasp. His jaw tightened. Kane moved, standing again. His nose twitched. He turned toward the door slowly, almost like in a ceremony, and began to walk. Not fast, not aggressive, just purposeful. He passed the infirmary hallway, turned left down a restricted wing no longer in use, and stopped before the last cell on the right. It was Malik's first holding cell on his intake night, long sealed due to renovation. But Kane barked twice, pawed the floor, then sat. Malik followed, heart thudding. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" A faint sound answered him. A soft, almost imperceptible tapping from inside the sealed cell wall. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had begun, swallowed by the weight of layered silence. But it was enough to ignite something urgent in Malik's bones. The guard beside him hesitated, glancing at the sealed cell, then at Kane, who remained absolutely still, ears tilted forward like a radar locked onto truth. Before anyone could move, the overhead speaker crackled. "Inmate 42,218 legal visit now." The voice was cold, clipped, unbothered by context. Malik's brow furrowed. No visits were scheduled. No one had come in 8 years, and yet someone had pulled strings fast enough to interrupt an active investigation. That meant power or desperation or both. He was escorted through the lower corridor into a small, windowless conference room, lined with faded law books no one had touched in decades. She was already there, standing by the wall-length bulletin board with an open manila folder in one hand and an expression like someone who had seen too much to be impressed by rank. Late 30s, lean, with sharp gray eyes and braids pulled back tight. She wore a black blazer over a white turtleneck and had an aura that made people instinctively straighten their spines. "My name's Evangeline Rourke," she said before he could ask. "I'm your new attorney." Malik blinked. "I didn't request a new one." She raised one eyebrow. "No, but someone did on your behalf. A woman named Sarah told me you'd understand." Malik stiffened. Sarah had been his ex before the trial tore their lives apart. She'd gone silent after year 2. He thought she moved on. Evangeline dropped the file on the table between them. "I believe you were framed," she said flatly, "and I have something you need to see." She flipped open the file and pulled out a photocopy worn, partially scorched at the edges, but still legible. It was a forensic report, dated the night of the shooting. Autopsy findings, ballistics, scene notes. A box labeled eyewitness confirmation was faintly circled in red ink, but the signature line beneath it was missing, torn away cleanly, like a scalpel had sliced the truth in half. "This isn't a copy from the court's evidence archive," she said. "Yours came from a private collection, recovered during a warehouse audit in Philadelphia last month. The warehouse belonged to a now-defunct evidence storage contractor, one that handled overflow for multiple precincts." Malik leaned in. "You're saying this was buried?" Evangeline nodded. "Or burned. But someone wanted to keep this fragment intact enough to matter. And the reason is, this," she tapped the red circle. The original witness signature wasn't a cop. It was a civilian, a firefighter. He claimed he saw the entire thing, but no one's ever spoken his name. Before Malik could respond, Kane let out a low whine. He was seated near the back of the room, but his body had shifted. Nose up, eyes narrowed, head tilted. A sound escaped him, barely audible. A chuff. Then another. Malik looked up sharply. "He hears something," he muttered. Evangeline tilted her head. "He's trained, more than most people," Malik said. "If he's reacting, One of the guards stepped forward. "You want us to open it," Malik said. "Let him lead." Kane trotted down the hallway, ignoring cells, turns, and orders shouted behind him. He reached the main entrance, then bolted left toward the administrative wing. Evangeline followed without question, Malik close behind, their pace matching the dog's urgency. He moved like a compass needle drawn toward magnetic history. The trail led out the back gate, through a secondary service path lined with crumbling pavement and overgrown weeds. The prison perimeter officer tried to stop them, but hesitated when Kane growled low and firm, standing his ground like a soldier on sacred territory. Malik's voice rang out. "There used to be a fire station here," he said, breath short. "Before they expanded the East Block, Station 13. It was decommissioned, but the building's still on the perimeter." Sure enough, past a broken chain-link gate and a wall of ivy, the outline of a forgotten structure emerged. The letters Station 13 had faded above the rusted double doors. Kane circled around to the side, found a shattered window, and leapt inside without hesitation. Malik and Evangeline followed, stepping into a space that smelled of mildew, dust, and rusted memory. It was hollow inside, abandoned lockers, cracked linoleum, old dispatch desks layered in dust. Kane barked once, sharp and echoing, then twice, slower. He pawed at the floor beside a burnt file cabinet that had collapsed into itself. Evangeline knelt, brushing aside debris. Her fingers found a thin metal hatch set into the concrete. It groaned open reluctantly, revealing a dry storage cavity no larger than a suitcase. Inside, a VHS tape wrapped in a waterproof cloth, a sealed envelope with a now yellowed fire department stamp, and a badge belonging to a firefighter named Caleb Monroe. Malik's eyes widened. "That name was in the old case files," he said, his voice barely more thick. "He disappeared before trial. The defense said he recanted, but his name, it was there once." Evangeline picked up the envelope, peeled it open with surgical precision. Inside, a handwritten letter, dated 8 years ago, addressed to whomever finds this. Her voice trembled slightly as she read aloud. I, Caleb Monroe, witnessed the incident on the night of March 2nd. The man they arrested did not fire the fatal shot. The angle, the position, everything was wrong. I tried to report it, but the department buried my statement. I feared for my safety. I had to vanish. If this gets to court, please find Malik Briggs. He didn't kill that officer. I swear it on everything I know. They stood in stunned silence, the kind that presses on your chest like an invisible hand. Kane exhaled sharply, turned, and barked once more, not at the hatch this time but toward the far corner of the room. There, behind a half-collapsed bookshelf, sat a dust-covered television and a VCR with wire still connected. Evangeline didn't wait. She rushed forward, plugged the device into an extension from her portable power pack, and slipped the tape inside. The screen flickered. Then a grainy, time-stamped recording emerged. March 2nd, 9:48 p.m. Warehouse exterior. Rain hammering down. Officer Hensley's silhouette, another man. Gun drawn. A third figure steps out from a black sedan. Badge. Clean suit, no rain gear. The shot echoes. The officer falls. The man with the gun isn't Malik. He's shorter, lighter, and he never looks toward the camera. Evangeline leaned in, frame by frame, as the suit turns briefly into light. A badge flashes. The name on it. The moment the power cut out, a thick blanket of darkness dropped over the ruined firehouse, like a closing curtain on a scene that had revealed too much. The tape had run for less than 30 seconds, but those few frames, grainy, distorted, drenched in stormlight, had cracked open a truth too long buried. Malik stood frozen, eyes still fixed on the blank screen, heart thudding with a rhythm that didn't match fear but something far more dangerous: recognition. Beside him, Kane let out a sharp, guttural growl, a sound that hadn't surfaced since their last active case together, and Malik didn't need to guess why. That voice from Kane was instinctual, specific and unmistakable. It was the warning he gave when a known threat entered his line of sight. Evangeline was already moving, flashlight in hand, checking connections, tracing wires, but Kane didn't move to help her. He stood staring at the now dead screen, hackles raised, body tight like a spring, and a low whine curling in his throat. Malik turned slowly toward him. "What did you see?" he murmured, even though the question was rhetorical. Kane couldn't answer with words, but his reaction was an answer in itself. He barked once, loud and sudden, then let out a strange, unfamiliar sound, something between a howl and a hiss. A visceral, snarling sound Malik hadn't heard since the night they raided that cartel safehouse in New Jersey. That night, Kane had detected an IED hidden behind a false wall by doing exactly what he was doing now, reacting not to what he smelled but to who he recognized. "Run the footage again," Malik snapped. Evangeline shook her head. "We can't. The system's blown, fuse boxes fried. Surge must have triggered when the tape hit the keyframe." She paused, squinting into the darkness. "But I saw enough. That man didn't match your build, or your gait, and that badge didn't reflect your name." Malik's jaw tightened. That matter, he wasn't just random. He stepped closer to the VCR and ejected the tape manually, careful not to damage the... He was careful, too careful. Face hidden, masked, but you can't fake body memory. Evangeline watched him, catching the subtle change in his tone. "You saw something," Malik nodded. Slowly, deliberately. "I saw how he walked." He looked down at Kane, who was now circling, agitated, letting out short barks at the crumbling brick wall. Kane saw it too. The shoulder tilt, left side dip. It's a patch recomposition. It's specific to guys who carry concealed on the right but favor a bad knee on the left. Evangeline narrowed her eyes. "That's awfully specific," Malik replied without pause. "Because I trained under him, Captain Roland Ashcroft." The name dropped between them like a weight. Evangeline flinched, almost instinctively. "That's impossible. Ashcroft was declared dead 6 years ago. Suicide. Car found submerged, no body recovered." Malik shook his head. "I never bought that. Internal Affairs was breathing down his neck back then. Financial misconduct, coercion of witnesses, falsified reports. He vanished right before his hearing. They pinned it on pressure. Called it a breakdown." He paused. "But that gate? That's his. I bet everything I have left on it." Kane growled again, pacing now more animated. His instincts were screaming, and Malik knew better than to doubt them. He always wore gloves on duty, Malik added, speaking more to himself than to Evangeline. Said it kept him clean, taught us how to move without leaving a trace. Evangeline crossed her arms, thinking aloud. If Ashcroft was the shooter, then the entire narrative collapses. The motive, the scene, your arrest, everything. Malik's laugh was hollow. Exactly. I wasn't the fall guy. I was the silence insurance. He rubbed his temple. But the tape won't be enough. It's degraded. It needs corroboration. Dates. Chain of custody. Something they can— Evangeline stepped closer. There's more than one copy, she said slowly. That storage locker we found was labeled Beta Archive, which means there was an alpha, an original, probably stored off-site. Ashcroft was old school. He wouldn't trust digital servers. He used hard copy backups. I know the kind of man he was. Malik met her gaze. You're saying he has a stash somewhere? She nodded. More like had. If he's alive, he's not keeping it in his apartment. But maybe, just maybe, it's still where he used to train us. Before either of them could speak again, Kane jolted upright and ran to the far wall. He barked rapidly 3 times and began clawing at the floor beneath a pile of moldy tiles. Malik rushed over, kneeling beside him. Together they scraped away dust and debris until they found a small rusted grate covering a hollow vent shaft. Inside sat a fireproof lockbox, small, heavy, sealed. Evangeline pulled it out carefully. The padlock had long rusted shut, but inside the lid, a small serial plate was etched. R. Ashcroft 47C, D. Diner District Fire Division, Evangeline said breathlessly. He used firehouse archives. That's how he moved evidence. Through closed departments, City wouldn't track internal transfers across defunct bureaus. She looked at Malik. There's a network underground, analog. Malik nodded, and he's still using it. They needed access. They needed clearance, but most of all they needed speed. If Ashcroft had faked his death and was still active, that meant he was watching from somewhere. Malik stared at the etched name. His mind burned through every detail of their shared past. Ashcroft had been brutal in training but strategic. A control freak. A man who believed the system was flawed, that the only justice was the one he delivered. Malik had idolized him once, had called him mentor, had trusted him. Kane sat again, tail stiff, nose twitching toward the open vent. Evangeline watched the dog, then turned back to Malik. If we're going to prove this, we need that original footage. We need his plan. Malik nodded, his voice grim. We need to become ghosts. The way he taught us. The firehouse creaked around them, old wood and silence and memories bleeding through the walls. Then Kane barked sharply again once, and Malik's heart skipped. He moved quickly, lifting the heavy cloth and revealing a black duffel bag tucked beneath. Inside, tactical gear, a police radio, and a burner phone still warm from recent use. Malik opened the call log. There was only one outgoing number, a code string familiar. Ashcroft's signature routing. The line had been active less than 10 minutes ago. The air was thick and waiting, like the sky was holding its breath before something snapped. By the time Malik was escorted back to his cell, the temperature had dropped 10 degrees and the clouds outside the razor wire fences boiled in slow motion. A storm was coming, not just of wind and rain, but of buried names, hidden tapes, and the truth clawing its way back to the surface. Kane had been taken to the K9 holding wing temporarily, locked away until the next meeting with Evangeline, who had gone off-site to verify the fire division access logs, tied to the duffel bag. Malik sat on the metal cot, muscles wired, unable to sleep. His mind played the same 30 seconds of distorted footage over and over, like his brain refused to let it fade until justice breathed again. Rain began to fall around midnight, soft at first, then harder, until the wind howled through the old vent slits in the concrete like a choir of ghosts. Lightning cracked open the sky, thunder rattled steel doors, and deep inside the administrative control center, monitors flickered once, then twice, then went black. The entire prison plunged into darkness. Backup power stuttered, sputtered, and then died. In the K9 wing, no one saw exactly when Kane vanished. Cameras had already gone out. His cage was still locked from the outside, no signs of forced entry, no broken latch. One moment he was there, lying calmly, eyes half shut. The next, he was gone. The only trace left behind was a single black hair wedged between two concrete tiles, and a faint, damp paw print leading toward the rear door of the kennel bay. Officers scrambled to search, but between the torrential rain, the failed comms, and rising panic, the system itself turned blind and deaf. Lightning kept slashing the sky like warnings in Morse code. Malik stood at the bars of his cell, watching the lights fail, feeling his pulse sink with the storm. Deep down, he knew Kane hadn't run. He was moving, with purpose, toward something. Morning came slow and gray, painting the prison in tones of ash and regret. Power returned in flickers. Lights buzzed back on like reluctant witnesses, but Kane hadn't returned. A full lockdown was initiated. No movement between blocks. Every dog handler, every warden, every internal affairs officer was summoned. Tensions ran hot. And then, at 7:43 a.m., a young CO named Travers walked into the warden's office to report the systems were back online. What he found stopped him cold. The warden's desk chair was overturned, papers scattered, but the most chilling detail was on the floor, starting at the center of the office and spiraling outward in a near-perfect swirl, like an artist had brushed it intentionally with claws. It wasn't mud, it wasn't water, it was blood. A dark, drying spiral of paw-shaped prints. 4 pads, define. One claw mark curved longer than the others, just like Kane's right front toe slightly overgrown from an old scar during a narcotics raid. No sign of the dog, no human blood trail, just the crimson spiral ending directly at the base of a locked filing cabinet labeled Classified Archives. Guards rushed in, radios crackling, demands flying. Forensics was called, photos were taken, no one could explain it. There were no broken windows, no damaged locks, no tripped sensors, just one thing. A faint streak of red drawn like a finger across a message from a dog. When Evangeline arrived 3 hours later, the storm still dripped from her coat, her boots soaked, her hair pulled back but wind-whipped. Malik was already waiting, seated in the attorney conference room with hands clasped tight and jaw clenched. She didn't speak immediately, just sat, then pulled out a crumpled napkin from her coat pocket. On it were coordinates. These led me to a fire division substation, she said quietly. You longer active, but the logs hadn't been purged. Ashcroft had access. He'd requisitioned storage space under a false name. And he'd checked out a series of tapes and sealed reports related to Operation Raven. Your final undercover mission before your arrest. Malik leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That op was sealed. Exactly, Evangeline replied. But he was watching it, monitoring everyone in it. And the name tied to that substation access, she slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy CCTV still, captured from a grain silo exit cam 2 nights before. The man wore a dark coat, gloves, and a hood pulled over his head. But even in low light, the posture was unmistakable. The left side gate, the same gate. The man hadn't died. He'd disappeared. And now he was watching from the shadows again. Malik stared at the photo, his jaw grinding. He's moving faster than we are, Evangeline nodded. But Kane's already out there, and I think he knows where Ashcroft is going. That afternoon, the spiral trail in the warden's office was cleaned up, but not before something else was found wedged behind the corner of the filing cabinet. Was a tiny glass vial, its surface smeared with blood. Inside, a micro SD card, no label, no fingerprints. Forensics techs had to pry it open with precision, and what they found was a single encrypted file with one title. It was voice only, distorted at first, then clear. A man's voice, mid-40s, firm but with a subtle tremor of paranoia. This message is for Ashcroft. You said they wouldn't find it, that no one saw the camera on the roof. But the dog knew. I don't care what you told me. He looked straight at me like he remembered. If this leaks, I'm gone. I won't go down with you. Blood on the stairs wasn't his. It was Hensley's. You made me plant the gun. You said Malik would break and confess. He didn't. He never did. If you're hearing this, it means I'm dead. The audio cut abruptly. Evangeline stared at Malik. Color drained from her face. We just got a confession. Malik didn't blink. Candace looked around a little. Her dominant hands shook, as if the micro SD confession had changed everything on paper. but not in court. Not yet. Not without corroboration, without context, without a living witness to link the voice to a name and the name to the lie. Malik knew how these systems worked. Cold, deliberate, allergic to emotion. But Kane's trail wasn't done yet. The spiral of blood had dried and the Silas alarm. The next morning, during routine med checks, Malik was pulled from his cell for a mandatory psych evaluation. An unusual procedure this late into a sentence, especially for an inmate with perfect behavioral records. He knew better than to ask questions. Instead, he walked, hands cuffed, flanked by 2 guards, down to the infirmary's east wing. The lights were dimmer there. The air smelled like rubbing alcohol and resignation. He was placed in a small examination room where time seemed suspended. After several minutes, the door creaked open and a woman entered, wearing the regulation white coat, her ID badge clipped crookedly to her chest. She didn't look up at first, just reviewed a chart, marked something on a clipboard, then finally turned to face him. She was young, mid-30s maybe, but there was something older in her eyes. Something that had seen too much too early. Her hair was pinned back in a bun that had started to unravel, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was softer than he expected. "You don't remember me, do you?" Malik studied her face. Something vaguely familiar in the curve of her jaw, the way she held her hands too tightly at her sides. "Should I?" he asked carefully. She didn't smile. "Maybe not. You were in chains the last time we met. I was just a med assistant. Volunteer, technically. During intake, I cleaned the wound on your temple the night they brought you in." Malik's brow furrowed. "That was 8 years ago. 7 years, 11 months, she corrected. And 12 days. She moved closer, pulling a small folder from her coat pocket, not part of the prison's medical system. Something older, worn soft by time and hands. She placed it on the table between them. "Before you open that," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you should know my name. I'm Lena Hensley." The name hit like a gut punch. Malik leaned back, breath caught. "As in, Officer Daniel Hensley was my father," she said flatly. "The one you're accused of killing." The room dropped 10 degrees in silence. Malik stared, trying to read her eyes, searching for the rage he expected, the hatred, but it wasn't there. Just sadness. And something else, a strange kind of resolve. "So what is this?" he asked, nodding toward the folder. "Your confrontation closure?" "No," she said quietly. "It's correction." She opened the folder and slid out a leather-bound journal, the kind cops used before digital logs took over. A nameplate inside read, D. Hensley Personal. She flipped to a bookmarked page, turned the journal so it faced Malik, and pointed to an entry dated 1 week before the warehouse shooting. He read it slowly, mouth tightening with each line. "Met with Ashcroft again. He wants me to sign off on an op I don't trust. Told me Malik's going too deep. Claims he's unstable. I don't buy it. The kid's solid, smart, careful. Someone's thinking him up. There's a pressure here I can't explain. If anything happens to me, I want this down. Malik saved my life during that bust in East Caldwell. Took a knife meant for me. Bled all over my vest. I owe him. Carry on. If he ever gets blamed for something he didn't do, it's because someone wanted his number." Malik looked up, throat dry. This is his handwriting?" Lena nodded. "I watched him write it. I asked him why he was being so dramatic. He just said, sometimes truth needs a backup copy. I didn't understand it then." Her hands trembled as she picked up the journal. "But I do now." She paused, then added, "I've kept this hidden for years. I thought..." Her voice faltered. "That's when I met Kane again." Malik's eyes narrowed. "Again?" She nodded slowly. "He was injured during a routine perimeter check. Some fencing collapse. He wasn't supposed to survive. But I stayed with him overnight. He kept pacing, agitated. Wouldn't let anyone near his kennel but me. Then one night he barked sharply 3 times. The same bark he used when I was a teenager, and he'd alert to my father's approach. It's like he knew who I was. Like he was telling me something." Malik sat frozen. Lena pulled out a photo from the back of the journal. It showed Kane as a pup, seated next to Officer Hensley. Tongue out, tail blurred in mid-wag. "He wasn't just your partner," she said. "He was ours. Dad raised him before you were even assigned." Something in Malik broke quietly. "I didn't know," he said. "You weren't supposed to," Lena replied. "The department wiped it. They didn't want a direct link between Kane and Hensley during trial discovery. Claimed conflict of interest. She flipped to the final page of the journal. There, in all caps, was a single sentence. If anyone reads, "You believe you didn't kill him." Malik closed his eyes, breath shaking. "I believe Kane's still fighting for him." Lena stood, brushing invisible dust from her coat. "I'm turning this over to Evangeline, along with the video logs I pulled from the defunct kennel office. There's more training files, behavior reports, handler transcripts. They all point in the same direction." Lena stood slowly. "What made you change your mind?" he asked. Lena looked at him for a long time, then simply said, "The dog remembered. They came for him before dawn, not with shackles and paperwork, but with silence and shadows." 2 guards entered Malik's cell without ceremony. No explanation beyond the clipped phrase, "Transfer Order Unit 7. He knew instantly something was wrong. Transfers didn't happen like this, not without 72-hour notice, not with his case under review. Evangeline was scheduled to return that afternoon, with new evidence from Lena and the digital archive Kane had traced to the fire division. But Malik wasn't given time to object. They forced him into transport shackles, wrists and ankles linked by steel, then escorted him through a side corridor. No inmates used one that smelled like old bleach and locked secrets. The van outside was unmarked, matte black, tires still damp from the last night's storm. There were no insignias, no numbers, just one figure waiting by the back door. Tall, built like an old athlete, head shaved, face partially obscured by a tactical vest zipped too high for comfort. He wore the insignia of Arkfield's internal security division, but Malik had never seen him inside the yard before. The man didn't speak, just opened the door, motioned Malik inside, then followed, locking it behind them with a finality that echoed louder than the rain still spitting across the windshield. The interior of the transport van was stripped bare. No plexiglass, no monitoring equipment, just 2 bench seats bolted to opposite walls. Malik was pushed against one of them, his cuffs clipped to a floor bracket, his feet chained with no room to stretch. The man took the opposite seat and waited. The engine hummed to life. No lights, no comms, no sound but the low growl of rubber on wet asphalt. 20 minutes passed in silence. Then the man reached down to his boot. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He simply pulled a blade from the inside heel, a thin combat knife with a matte black hilt and no identification number. Malik's eyes narrowed, instincts flaring. "That's not protocol," he said, voice calm but his pulse was already racing. The man didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, the blade resting on his thigh, edge angled up. "You shouldn't have kept pushing," the man finally muttered. Malik didn't blink. "Ashcroft sent you." Still no answer. But the eye speg had. "You think killing me will bury it again?" Malik asked. "You think the dog'll stop?" The man gave the faintest smile. "The dog's already gone." He leaned forward, gripping the blade tighter, and in that instant Malik saw the shift of weight. The lunge. He braced himself, knowing he couldn't dodge, couldn't block, not with his hands. The knife came up, angled toward his neck, swift and practiced. And then everything exploded. There was a sound like metal being torn from bone, and the left side of the van crumpled inward with a deafening crash. The door burst open from the outside, hinges screeching as steel twisted like paper. A black blur launched through the space like a missile, fangs flashing in the morning gray. The blade dropped, skidding across the floor. The van rocked sideways. The guard screamed once short, sharp before Kane's jaws clamped down on his shoulder, dragging him backward with impossible force. Blood sprayed the wall as the man flailed, trying to strike, to grab Kane's muzzle, but the dog didn't yield. Malik shouted, twisting against the floor cuffs, trying to reach the blade. Kane didn't let go. Instead, he pivoted, snapped his body like a whip, and lunged for the seatbelt strap, locking Malik to the bracket. With one violent shake, his teeth shredded the nylon harness. Then he sank his teeth into the lower chain, pulling, twisting until the link cracked under stress. Malik was free. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the knife and spinning as the guard rose, bleeding, panting, still alive but dazed. Kane moved with him, circling, guarding, waiting for another strike. The guard reached for his belt, but Malik was already there. He grabbed the man by the vest, slammed him backward into the van wall. disarmed the sidearm holstered under his jacket, and pressed the blade gently, firmly against his neck. "You want a name," Malik hissed. The man spat blood. "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Malik drove his fist into the man's temple. The body slumped. Kane growled low, pacing beside the fallen attacker. The van was still running, its tires spinning in place near a gravel embankment off a service road no map marked. Malik opened the side door and stepped out. The woods around them were thick and wet, trees still dripping from last night's storm. No other vehicles, no backup, no cameras, just emptiness. "Kane," he whispered, staring at the dog, "how the hell did you find me?" Kane didn't answer. He just sat, chest heaving, eyes steady. There was blood on his snout. His shoulder was scratched, but he didn't limp. He didn't flinch. He had... Malik pulled the unconscious guard from the van and dragged him onto the grass, using zip ties from the rear compartment to bind his hands and ankles. Then he searched the van. There was no manifest, no GPS, but in the glove compartment, hidden beneath a false panel, was a small black case. Inside it, another flash drive. Malik plugged it into the backup tablet Evangeline had slipped him 2 nights ago, hidden inside a hollowed-out legal folder. The drive opened with a single file folder labeled Ashcroft Directive 9, and buried within it, time-stamped 12 hours before Malik's unauthorized transfer order, was an email chain between 3 users, one redacted, one marked D Field Ops, and the last tagged with the username Ash47. The subject line read, "Briggs, Final Contingency." The courtroom felt colder than any prison Malik had ever known. The kind of cold that wasn't about temperature but memory-heavy. Quiet, coiled beneath polished wood and forced decorum. The benches were filled, reporters hunched over tablets whispering to each other as the overhead lights buzzed. The sound of the bailiff's gavel echoed once, and then silence fell. Malik stood beside Evangeline at the defense table, dressed in the same ill-fitting suit he'd worn the day of his original sentencing. This time, however, there was no chain around his waist, no shackle clinking with every shift in posture. But the weight was still there. It always had been. On the prosecution side, the state's representatives sat straight-backed and unreadable. A younger man who hadn't even graduated law school when Malik was first. It didn't matter. What mattered now was who would sit at the bench. They hadn't released the judge's name publicly. It had been kept sealed until the morning of the hearing, allegedly for safety reasons. But when the side door opened and the judge stepped in, robes swaying, Malik's breath caught mid-throat. The man was tall, lean, late 50s with silver streaking the sides of his dark hair, and eyes that looked more like knives than sight. The nameplate on the bench read, Han, Samuel K. Ashcroft. Malik didn't move, didn't blink. Not because he was surprised, but because the truth had finally arrived in a robe in a courtroom where it had no business hiding anymore. Samuel Ashcroft, younger brother of Roland Ashcroft, the same Roland who had orchestrated the setup, the same man who had vanished after falsifying Malik's involvement. Now his brother sat in judgment, claiming neutrality behind mahogany. Evangeline leaned in slowly, whispering under her breath, "They buried this. His name's not on the assignment docket." Malik's voice was a razor. "He's not here for justice. He's here to bury it again." But Kane, sitting silent at Malik's heel, head lowered in service animal posture, was the first to act. The moment the judge cleared his throat and looked down toward Malik, Kane let out a low, trembling whine. Then, without cue, without command, the German shepherd stood, lifted his head toward the bench, and released a deep, eerie howl. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a threat. It was a cry, a signal, a sound Malik hadn't heard since the night Officer Hensley died. The courtroom froze. The judge's hand halted mid-motion. One of the deputies started forward, but Evangeline raised a warning hand. "Don't," she said. "Let him finish." Kane's eyes were locked on the judge, unblinking. Another howl. Longer, louder. Then silence again. Malik stepped forward, voice calm but ice beneath. "Your Honor, I move for immediate recusal." Samuel narrowed his eyes. "On what grounds?" Evangeline rose, sliding a packet of documents forward. "Conflict of interest. Blood relation to the original arresting officer's commanding officer, Roland Ashcroft." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge didn't flinch. That relation was never proven relevant. Malik spoke now, clear and deliberate. It's relevant now. We have evidence Roland Ashcroft falsified reports, orchestrated my frame job, and ordered a contracted hit on my life less than 72 hours ago. The operative failed, but left behind this. He handed over a printed excerpt of the Directive 9 email thread, complete with timestamp, sender IP, and the embedded digital signature of Ashcroft's burner node. Evangeline followed up with the microSD confession, Lena Hensley's affidavit, and Officer Hensley's handwritten journal pages. You didn't think anyone would connect it, she said flatly, because you buried the links. But the dog remembered, and the trail you tried to erase started bleeding again. The judge's lips parted, but no words came out. Kane growled one final time. The silence hung like fog. A court clerk stepped forward nervously and accepted the evidence folder. The room remained still. Then a second gavel rang, not from the judge but from the bailiff, who motioned toward the state's attorney, receiving a whispered confirmation in return. The prosecutor rose and said, "Given the scope of new material and potential judicial compromise, the state consents to a special review motion. We request transfer to a federal tribunal pending verification." The judge clenched his jaw. His brother's sins had crossed into open daylight. Kane sat again, tail wrapping around his legs. Evangeline whispered, "We just cracked it." Malik nodded once, but his eyes never left the judge's face. The final gavel dropped, not with noise but with a breath that released 8 years of buried breath from Malik's chest. The courtroom a haze of blinking lights and murmuring officials scrambling to realign a narrative that no longer held weight. The judge, reassigned by federal order within the hour, was escorted from the bench as Evangeline pressed the final envelope into the hands of a U.S. Marshal. The exoneration came swift in language but slow in sensation. The words "cleared of all charges" echoed inside Malik like they belonged to someone else. By the time they led him through the final gate of Arkfield, there was no ceremony, no reporters, just a silent dawn peeling over barbed wire and the low hum of diesel engines warming in the staff lot. Malik stepped into the light in the same shoes he was arrested in, scuffed, worn, but finally pointed forward. Kane was beside him, slower now, his steps heavier, the silver in his coat bright under the morning sun. He had earned every scar, every gray hair, every moment of this walk. The gates opened, slow and reluctant, as if the system itself hesitated to release what it had once swallowed whole. Evangeline waited outside with Lena in a borrowed government sedan, both leaning against the hood, coffee in hand, tired but alive in a way only survivors understand. But behind them, parked innocently across the street, was a white utility truck that didn't belong. No logo, no license plate, just tinted windows and a low idle that never changed pitch. Malik clocked it immediately. "That truck's been parked 3 days in a row," he said quietly, not looking at it. Evangeline frowned. "It showed up the morning after the hearing," she replied. "No registered ownership, no plate match. We ran it, it's clean in all the wrong ways." Kane had already turned toward it, his posture stiff, nose twitching like memory pulling at his instincts. Malik started toward the sedan, but Kane stayed behind, staring at the truck like it had spoken first. The windows didn't roll down. The engine didn't shift. But the moment Malik crossed the yellow-painted line that marked prison property from open world, the driver stepped on the gas. The truck rolled forward, slow, deliberate, its front grip aligned perfectly with Malik's path. He stopped. So did the truck. 10 feet, 5, then it began again. Kane moved without warning. His body, though slower than years past, still carried the fury of purpose. He bolted forward, barking, his voice not angry but commanding, a sound that vibrated through Malik's ribcage and echoed off the trees. The truck didn't stop, it accelerated. Malik shouted. Evangeline stepped in front of him. Lena reached for her phone, but Kane didn't wait for help. He cut sideways, crossed the truck's blind spot, and launched himself directly in front of the grill. The driver swerved too hard, two sharp wheels screeched and bit into gravel. The truck clipped a ditch, lost traction, and flipped once, then again, before slamming down the ravine that edged the service road. Dust flew, glass exploded, and for a long moment, nothing moved. Malik ran, down the incline, past thornbush and snapped fence wire, toward the smoking cab of the vehicle. Kane limped behind him, panting hard, blood staining one front leg. The smell of fuel hung sharp in the air. The door was bent, twisted, but Malik wrenched it open. The driver inside was dead neck broken, face half hidden behind a tactical scarf. No ID, no badge. But in the passenger seat was a satchel cracked open from the force of impact. Inside were two things: a burner phone set to record and a mini recorder already running, red light blinking. Malik pressed play. The voice was grainy, older now, but undeniable. It was Roland Ashcroft. "If this gets out," the voice hissed, "they'll know everything. I didn't mean to kill Hensley, but he saw the payment. He threatened to expose it. Briggs wasn't supposed to be there. But once he saw the angle, once he started asking the right questions, I had no choice. The body cam got it all. The tape was never lost. I buried it under Station 13. The dog found it. He always finds it. That damn dog." The voice cracked. "If you're hearing this, I'm either dead or you're getting close. Either way, it's done. There's no redemption left in this." Malik's hands trembled. He looked at Kane, who was lying beside the wreck, breathing shallow but eyes still locked on Malik as if waiting for a verdict. Malik knelt beside him, placed a hand gently on the scarred fur between his ears, and whispered, "You did it, boy. It's over." Kane closed his eyes, his chest rising once, then falling again with a sigh that sounded like relief. Sirens echoed in the distance. Justice had come too late, but it had come, and the one who never stopped searching had led it to the last gate. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. I'd love to know what moment hit you the hardest, and where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about it.